Hi students, this is Mr. Yang. Today we are going to talk about 4.3a, where this time we will learn how to write exponential equations from graphs. In 4.2, we have learned the general form, and that is f of x equals a times b to the x power plus c. The requirement is b has to be greater than 0, and b cannot be 1. Well, because we can actually have a straight line. And we have also learned the names for each of these numbers. A is called the initial value, B is called the growth or decay factor, and C is called the vertical shift. In the previous lesson, we were actually graphing these exponential functions by plotting. As you were graphing, as you were creating that XY table, you may have noticed there were some patterns of the numbers that we're getting. So today we are going to go through a backward process and use the pattern to write exponential functions. So here are the steps. For today's specific lesson, we are going to deal with the situation when c is actually 0, which means the function we're getting is more going to be like f of x equals a times b to the x power. Because if c is 0, well, then basically we don't have a number on the end. So let's have a look at some steps with an example. Example 1. Step 1. We're going to put the order pairs into an XY table with the x value increasing, emphasizing on x values increasing, which also means you have to read your points from left to right on a graph. You can't just go for the y-axis, y-intercept, and then go backwards. That's not going to work. For example, 1, 2, 3, you are given a table. So this is more for example 4, 5, and 6 on the next lesson. So this is already being put into the XY table with x value increasing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, as you can notice. Step 2, we're going to find a growth or decay factor, which is letter B, by finding some ratios. The ratio is y sub 1 over y sub 0, or y sub 2 over y sub 1. Or in other words, we're going to use the bottom y value divided by the previous y value. Here's what it means. And here's also where these y sub 1, y sub 0 come from. So because we are given a table and we don't exactly know what kind of numbers we're going to get, so we're going to label these positions. So the first we may have x sub 0, x sub 1, x sub 2, x sub 3, x sub 4. These are just the labels. And then correspondingly, we will have y sub 0, y sub 1, y sub 2, y sub 3, and y sub 4. So now we are going to take the bottom one and divide by the previous one. As you may notice, is y sub 1 divided by y sub 0, y sub 1 divided by y sub 0. So it's actually 6 divided by 3, or 12 divided by 6, or 24 divided by 12, or 48 divided by 24. As you may notice, all of these 4 pairs of numbers, after you divide them, they're going to give you the same value, which is 2. And that is our factor B. Again, it's the bottom divided by the top, bottom divided by the top. And one other thing, please make sure you have at least 3 pairs of points. Because in the next lesson, you may notice you're not having a pattern. So you have to make sure you have at least 3 pairs of points so you can check to see if it is exactly the pattern following like this one. Next, step 3, we're going to find the initial value, a, which actually comes from the y-intercept. So here it is. The y-intercept is actually right here, 0, 3. Or in other words, the y-intercept is when x is 0. So when x is 0, the number is going to be our y-intercept. And the y-intercept is also going to be our initial value. So that means our a is going to be 3, coming from the y-intercept. And since our x is increasing and you can see y is clearly getting bigger, that is going to be growth. Lastly, we are going to write the function into f of x equals a times b to the x power. F of x equals my a is 3, and then my b is 2. And there's example 1. So you are just basically using a ratio to find a factor, and the y-intercept is going to give you the initial value, and the y's If it's increasing, it's going to be growth. If it's decreasing, it's going to be decay. But this, again, is based on that you have x value as increasing. So that's example 1. Moving on, example 2. Same steps. So let's go over it. Bottom divided by the top, so it's going to be 200 over 800. And I'm going to check another one, 50 over 200, or 12.5 over 50. All of these are going to be simplified to be 1/4. And that is my factor. As for my initial value, that comes from the y-intercept, that's going to be 800. And this time, you see the y value is actually getting smaller. My x is still increasing, that doesn't change anything, but my y is actually getting smaller, so that is going to be decay. So finally, my function is going to be, my a is 800, and my b is going to be 1/4 to the x power. Something else to emphasize on, make sure you actually use parentheses around the 1/4. Because if you don't use it, it's just going to be 1 to the x power, but it's actually the 4 also getting the x power, so that's why you got to put 1/4 all together inside the parentheses. Moving on, example 3. We still have a table, and this time is not vertical, but the idea doesn't change. It's the next number divided by the previous. So we are going to use 108 divided by 36, or 324 divided by 108, or 972 divided by 324. All of them are going to give you 3. Next, we're going to need to find the initial value, or in other words, we need to find when x equal to 0. As right now in the table, you don't see x equals 0, but you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, and following that pattern, clearly 0 is actually going to be before the 1. And now, if you follow the pattern, number is going to need to be smaller than 36 because we're getting to 36 and then it's actually multiplied by 3, multiplied by 3, multiplied by 3 to get to the next number. So the previous number we can't multiply by, we have to divide by 3 to find out it's actually 12. Because it comes from 12 that multiplied by 3, that gives us a 36, which means my initial value is going to be 12. It's getting bigger, so it is growth. And my function is 12 times 3 to the x power. That is example 3. Moving on, example 4. This time you are not given the points, you're not given the table, so you are going to need to identify the points to actually form the table. The points are actually labeled for you in a way, so remember you got to read your points from left to right. My first point is 0, 1. Second point is 1, 3. Third point is 2, 9. So for my factor, 3 over 1 or 9 over 3, you can see they still follow the same pattern. They give you the same number. My factor is 3. As for the y-intercept, right here is going to be 1. The y value is getting bigger, so it's going to be growth. And the function is 1 times 3 to the x power, but we typically don't write the 1. 1 is going to be invisible. So we are going to need to simplify it to be just 3 to the x power. That is example 4. Next, example 5. This is where some of you may have the habit, oh, I'm going to start with the middle, which is the y-intercept, and then I'm going to go left. But you can't. You have to read your graph from left to right. That's how we get the points. The first one is going to be -3, 16, then -2, which is at 4, and then -1, which is at 1. In that case, 4 over 16 or 1 over 4 is going to be, they're both going to give you 1 over 4. Now, you don't exactly have 0 on in the table or super clear on the graph. You can kind of estimate it right here, but we don't know for sure. That's why we're going to follow the pattern. -3, -1, -2, -1, the next number is going to be 0. And you can see we are basically dividing by 4 or times by 1/4 to get to the next number. So we're going to still times by 1/4 again. That means 0 is corresponding with 1/4. And that is going to be our initial value, 1/4. And the numbers are getting smaller, so it's going to be decay. And the function is 1/4 times, don't forget the parentheses for the base, is 1/4 inside parentheses, and then 2 to the x power. That is example 5. Moving on, example 6. This time, the points are not labeled for you, but we are going to use the points that are on the grid because these are going to be some very nice points that are easy to use. So the first point I see, remember, you got to read your points from left to right. So the first one that's on the grid is right here, and that is -1, -2. Next point is right here, and that is 0, -4. Next one is right here, that is 1, -8. Keep going. Do we have another point? Yes, we do. Right here, which is 2, -16. So let's find the factor. Bottom divided by the top, -4 over -2, or -8 over -4, or -16 over -8. They're all going to be simplified to be 2. And that is our factor. Next, initial value. That comes from the y-intercept. So it's going to be -4. The numbers are getting, well, even though you see the value is kind of getting bigger, but actually they are getting smaller because they're all negative numbers. Also, you can see the graph is going down on the right, so it's going to be decay. As for the function, it's f of x equals -4 times 2 to the x power. And that is example 6. That is everything for 4.3a. Thank you.